The millionaire asked the single father, "How did you buy your poverty? I have 20 Mercedes at home." The November sun cast long shadows across the pristine showroom floor of Ashford Luxury Motors in Charlotte, North Carolina. Ravenna Ashford stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows of her corner office, surveying her empire with the cold satisfaction of someone who'd built everything through ruthless determination. At 25, she commanded a network of 15 Mercedes dealerships across 3 states, her net worth hovering near $900 million. Her royal blue Armani blazer, one of 12 identical ones in her closet, was pressed to perfection. Her ice-blonde hair fell in a sleek curtain past her shoulders, and her black Louboutin heels clicked with authority on the marble floor as she descended the floating staircase to the showroom. It was 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, the slow hour when serious buyers were still at their offices and tire kickers hadn't yet arrived. Ravenna preferred this quiet time to inspect every detail of her flagship location, to ensure the champagne-colored Mercedes-Maybach S-Class positioned under the central spotlight didn't have a single fingerprint on its flawless paint, to verify that her sales team maintained the impeccable standards she demanded. Marcus Sterling, her head of sales, approached with his tablet. "Ms. Ashford, the Henderson deal closed this morning. $237,000 for the G-Wagon, with the custom interior package." "Expected," Ravenna replied without looking at him, her eyes scanning the showroom for imperfections. The Hendersons were always going to buy. Old money families don't haggle. What about the Taiwanese tech executive I told you to cultivate? Meeting scheduled for Thursday. He's very interested in the AMG GT Black Series. Make sure Chen handles it personally. No one else touches that account. Ravenna's voice carried the absolute certainty of someone whose every command was instantly obeyed. She'd learned early that hesitation was weakness, that kindness was exploited, that the world respected only power and money. The front doors opened, admitting a blast of autumn air and an unexpected visitor. A man entered, and Ravenna's perfectly shaped eyebrow arched with immediate disdain. He wore the unmistakable uniform of a maintenance worker, navy blue coveralls with Collins Janitorial Services embroidered on the chest pocket, work boots that had clearly seen better days, and a face that suggested late 30s weathered by actual labor. His dark hair needed cutting, and there was tiredness in his posture that money couldn't buy and poverty couldn't hide. Beside him walked a small girl, no more than 6 years old, with wild curly hair barely contained in 2 lopsided pigtails. She wore a yellow dress that was clean but clearly purchased from a discount store, white sneakers with scuffed toes, and carried a worn backpack decorated with stickers. Her brown eyes were enormous as she stared at the gleaming vehicles surrounding them. "Daddy," the girl whispered, her voice carrying in the acoustically perfect showroom. "They're all so shiny." "They sure are, Princess," the man replied, his voice gentle and educated in a way that didn't match his appearance. "Remember what we talked about? We're here to look, to learn, and to practice being respectful in fancy places." Ravenna's lip curled with disgust. This was exactly the kind of situation she paid security to prevent, working-class wanderers treating her showroom like a free museum, touching surfaces with their common fingers, breathing their poverty into her carefully curated atmosphere of exclusive luxury. But before she could summon security, something caught her attention through the windows. Parked directly in front of the entrance, taking up 2 premium visitor spaces, sat a Mercedes AMG GT 63S in obsidian black. The 4-door coupe gleamed in the afternoon sun, its 19-inch wheels perfectly clean, its price tag north of $160,000. It was last year's model, 2019, but still commanded respect. And according to the temporary tag visible in the rear window, it had been purchased just days ago. Ravenna's mind calculated instantly. The janitor had arrived in the AMG, which meant either he'd stolen it, borrowed it from an employer, or impossibly actually owned it. The third option was so unlikely it bordered on insulting to consider, but Ravenna had built her fortune on reading people and situations with brutal accuracy. She descended upon them like a hawk spotting prey, her heels announcing her approach with sharp clicks against the marble. Marcus and two other salespeople hovered nearby, sensing drama about to unfold and unwilling to miss the show. Ravenna Ashford's confrontations were legendary in the Charlotte luxury automotive community. "Excuse me," Ravenna's voice cut through the air like a blade wrapped in velvet. "Can I help you find something? Perhaps directions to a more appropriate establishment?" The man turned to face her, and for just a moment something flickered in his eyes. Was it amusement? Recognition? But his expression remained carefully neutral as he extended his hand. "Good afternoon. We were hoping to look at your S-Class lineup. My daughter has a school project about different types of vehicles, and I thought it would be educational to see luxury cars in person." Ravenna ignored his outstretched hand, letting it hang awkwardly in the space between them. "A school project," she repeated, her tone making it clear what she thought of that explanation. How wonderfully civic-minded. "However, this is a place of business, not an educational facility. We cater to serious buyers, not people conducting research." The little girl pressed closer to her father's leg, her earlier excitement dimming. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "We didn't mean to bother anyone. Daddy said we should always be polite and respectful." "Daddy also should have taught you that there are places where people like you belong, and places where you don't," Ravenna replied, her voice sharp enough to cut. She gestured toward the man's coveralls. "Collins Janitorial Services. I'm familiar with the company. They clean office buildings downtown for minimum wage. So let's dispense with the pretense of a school project, shall we? You're here because you wanted to show your daughter something she'll never be able to afford, wanted to play pretend in a world that's permanently closed to people in your economic bracket." Marcus shifted uncomfortably behind her. Even by Ravenna's standards, this was harsh. The other salespeople exchanged glances, unsure whether to intervene or remain silent witnesses. The man's jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm. "Ma'am, I understand you have a business to run and standards to maintain. We're not here to waste anyone's time. My daughter Lily and I simply wanted to appreciate the craftsmanship that goes into vehicles like these. We'll look quickly and leave without disturbing your other customers." "There are no other customers at the moment, which is precisely why I'm addressing this situation personally," Ravenna countered. She turned her cold blue gaze on little Lily, who was now trying very hard not to cry. "Tell me, dear, what exactly does your daddy do for a living? Does he clean toilets, mop floors, empty trash cans in buildings where people with real careers work?" He takes care of buildings," Lily stammered, her small voice trembling. "He makes sure everything is clean and nice for people. He works really hard." "I'm sure he does," Ravenna said with exaggerated sympathy that dripped with condescension. "Hard work is admirable, but hard work at a certain level simply doesn't generate the kind of income that allows for Mercedes-Benz ownership. So I'll ask you a direct question, Mr. Hayes, Daniel Hayes. Mr. Hayes, that AMG GT parked outside with temporary tags, how exactly did someone in your position acquire a vehicle worth more than you probably earn in 3 years? The question hung in the air like smoke. Every person in the showroom held their breath, waiting for the answer. Ravenna crossed her arms, her royal blue blazer crisp and unyielding, her expression radiating absolute certainty that she'd just cornered a criminal or a liar. Daniel Hayes looked down at his daughter, who was staring up at him with wide, worried eyes. Then he looked back at Ravenna, and something in his demeanor shifted. The weariness fell away, replaced by something harder, more calculating. When he spoke, his voice carried a new edge. "That's an interesting question, Ms. Ashford. Yes, I know who you are. Your reputation precedes you. You want to know how a janitor affords a $160,000 car." He paused, letting the tension build. "The same way I afforded the other 20 identical ones sitting in my garage at home." The silence that followed was absolute. Ravenna's confident smirk faltered for the first time, confusion flickering across her perfectly made-up face. Marcus's tablet nearly slipped from his hands. The other salespeople froze mid-motion, uncertain they'd heard correctly. Little Lily looked up at her father and said in a voice that carried clearly through the stunned silence, "Daddy, are we going to buy 5 more today like you said, for the collection?" And in that moment, as Ravenna Ashford's world began to tilt on its axis, she had absolutely no idea that the man standing before her in a janitor's uniform was about to teach her the most expensive lesson of her life. The silence stretched for 3 heartbeats, 4, 5. Ravenna's mind raced through calculations, searching for the angle, the deception, the explanation that would restore her understanding of how the world worked. But Daniel Hayes simply stood there, his hand resting gently on his daughter's shoulder, waiting with the patience of someone who had nothing to prove. "I'm sorry," Ravenna finally said, her voice dripping with sarcasm to cover her momentary confusion. "But did you just claim to own 21 Mercedes-AMG GT 63S models, the same car that costs over $160,000 each? That would be..." She calculated quickly, over $3 million in identical vehicles. "Forgive me if I find that claim somewhat difficult to believe, Mr. Hayes. Actually," Lily piped up helpfully, "Daddy says it's $3,400,000, but some of them he got for less because he bought them all at once. He says buying in bulk saves money like when we buy cereal at Costco." Despite everything, several of the salespeople suppressed smiles at the girl's innocent comparison between buying luxury vehicles and grocery shopping. But Ravenna's expression hardened further. "This is absurd," she declared, her voice rising slightly. "Marcus, call security. These people are clearly—" "Wait!" The voice came from the back of the showroom, near the private client offices. A distinguished man in his 60s emerged, his silver hair impeccably styled, wearing a suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent. "Miss Ashford, a moment, please." Ravenna recognized Richard Chen, her top salesperson, and the man she'd assigned to handle their most exclusive clientele. His presence during her confrontation irritated her, but she respected his judgment enough to pause. "Mr. Chen? I'm handling a situation with Daniel Hayes, yes." Richard approached with a tablet, his expression carefully neutral. "Ms. Ashford, I believe there may be some confusion. Mr. Hayes contacted our dealership last week about a potential fleet purchase. I've been corresponding with his assistant about specifications for a private collection." The ground shifted beneath Ravenna's Louboutin. "You've been corresponding," she repeated slowly, "with this man's assistant?" "With Catherine Morrison at Hayes Automotive Holdings, yes." Richard showed her the tablet screen, where email exchanges detailed discussions about purchasing multiple high-end vehicles. "Mr. Hayes is rather well known in certain circles for his unusual approach to automotive collecting. He focuses on single models, purchased in quantity rather than diverse portfolios." Ravenna's face flushed beneath her perfect makeup. She'd made a mistake, possibly a catastrophic one, but her pride wouldn't allow immediate retreat. "If Mr. Hayes is truly who you claim, why would he arrive at my dealership dressed as a janitor? Why the theater, the deception?" "Because," Daniel said quietly, his calm voice somehow more cutting than any shout, "I wanted to see how you treat people you consider beneath you. I've been reading reviews of this dealership for months, Miss Ashford. Do you know what I found? Dozens of complaints from customers who felt humiliated, dismissed, or insulted because they didn't meet your visual standards of wealth. Teachers, nurses, small business owners, people with excellent credit and genuine interest in purchasing vehicles, all treated like contaminants in your pristine showroom." He gestured to his coveralls. "So I borrowed this uniform from my building maintenance supervisor, put my daughter in her play clothes instead of her private school uniform, and came to see if the reviews were accurate. And you know what? They were conservative. You're actually worse in person than your reputation suggested." Lily tugged on her father's sleeve. "Daddy, the teacher lady last week was really nice. She let me sit in 3 different cars and explained all the safety features." "Why was this lady so mean?" "Because, Princess," Daniel replied, never taking his eyes off Ravenna. Some people measure others by their bank accounts instead of their character. They forget that wealth is temporary, but how you treat people defines who you really are. Ravenna felt something she rarely experienced: genuine uncertainty. Her entire business model was built on exclusivity, on maintaining an atmosphere that attracted only serious, affluent buyers. But looking at the expressions of her sales staff, she saw something troubling. They weren't rallying to her defense. They were watching her with what looked like satisfaction at seeing her finally challenged. "Mr. Hayes," she began, shifting tactics, her voice becoming smooth and professional, "I apologize if my initial assessment was incorrect. Perhaps we got off on the wrong foot. If you're genuinely interested in purchasing vehicles, I'm sure we can—" "No." The single word cut through her practiced charm like a knife. "You don't get to flip a switch and suddenly treat me with respect now that you think I have money. That's not how integrity works. You showed me exactly who you are, Ms. Ashford, and I believe you." He took Lily's hand. "Come on, sweetheart. Let's go visit the dealership where the teacher lady works. She actually deserves our business." "Wait!" Ravenna's composure cracked slightly. "Mr. Hayes, I run a business that requires maintaining certain standards. Surely you understand that not everyone who walks through those doors is a legitimate buyer. I was simply judging by appearance," Daniel interrupted, "making assumptions based on clothing and occupation, treating a 6-year-old child with contempt because her father works for a living. Yes, I understand perfectly. And now you understand something. Hayes Automotive Holdings owns 17% of Mercedes-Benz dealerships in the southeastern United States. We're always looking to expand our portfolio." He paused at the door, his next words landing like bombs. "This morning, my acquisition team reached out to your board of directors about potentially purchasing Ashford Luxury Motors, the entire 15-dealership network. Your shareholders were very interested, especially given the recent dip in customer satisfaction scores." Ravenna's blood ran cold. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Daniel smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Richard, check your email. I believe my team sent over the preliminary offer about an hour ago." Richard Chen looked at his tablet, scrolled through his messages, and his eyes widened. "Ms. Ashford, there's an email here from Hayes Automotive Holdings dated 1:15 p.m. today. Subject line, preliminary acquisition proposal for Ashford Luxury Motors." The showroom had gone completely silent. Every salesperson, every service technician who'd wandered out from the back, every person in the building watched Ravenna Ashford's perfect facade crack. "That's impossible," she whispered. "My board would have informed me immediately about an acquisition approach." "Would they?" Daniel asked mildly. "Are you certain about that? Because from what my team discovered, several of your board members have been quietly expressing concerns about your management style for over a year. Something about high staff turnover, declining customer retention, and a CEO more interested in being feared than respected." Lily looked confused. "Daddy, I thought we were just looking at cars for my school project. Why is everyone upset?" Daniel knelt beside his daughter, speaking gently. "Sometimes, Princess, grown-ups need to learn important lessons too. The lady here needed to understand that treating people badly has consequences, that being mean to others eventually comes back to hurt you." He stood and faced Ravenna one final time. "I haven't decided whether to proceed with the acquisition, Ms. Ashford. But if I do, you should know that the first change I'll make is replacing any executive who values appearance over character, who confuses cruelty with strength, who forgets that every person who walks through these doors, janitor, teacher, nurse, or billionaire, deserves basic human respect." "Udine!" As Daniel and Lily walked toward the exit, Richard Chen called out, "Mr. Hayes, wait. At least allow me to show you what you came to see. I'd be honored to give your daughter a proper tour of our S-Class lineup. She mentioned a school project?" Daniel paused, considering. Lily looked up at him hopefully. "Can we, Daddy? I promise to take really good notes for my presentation." "The tour would be my pleasure," Richard continued, shooting a meaningful glance at Ravenna. And Miss Ashford need not be involved. I'll handle everything personally." Daniel studied Richard for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, but this is your reputation on the line now, Mr. Chen. Don't waste our time or patronize my daughter." "I wouldn't dream of it," Richard assured him, genuine warmth in his voice. "Lily, would you like to start with the Maybach S-Class? It has features I think you'll find fascinating for your project." As Richard led Lily toward the centerpiece vehicle, explaining its features with genuine enthusiasm, Daniel remained near the door. His eyes met Ravenna's across the showroom floor, and the message was clear. This wasn't over. Ravenna stood frozen, her mind spinning through implications and consequences. Around her, she could feel her staff's eyes, could sense their thoughts. The Ice Queen finally met someone she couldn't bully. The untouchable Ravenna Ashford just got demolished by a man in a janitor's uniform. Marcus approached hesitantly. "Ms. Ashford, what would you like me to do?" Ravenna's jaw clenched. Her pride warred with her business sense. Her ego battled her survival instinct. She'd built this empire by being harder than everyone else, colder, more ruthless. She'd never apologized, never backed down, never admitted error. But she'd also never faced someone who could genuinely destroy everything she'd built with a single business decision. "Nothing," she said finally, her voice barely controlled. "Do nothing. Let Chen handle it." She turned on her heel, climbing back toward her office, her Louboutins clicking with less certainty than before. Behind her, she could hear Lily's delighted voice asking questions about engine specifications and safety features, could hear Richard's patient, respectful responses. In her office, Ravenna closed the door and leaned against it, her perfect composure finally cracking in private. She pulled out her phone and dialed her lawyer, her hands shaking slightly with a mixture of rage and fear she refused to acknowledge as anything but strategic concern. "David, it's Ravenna. I need you to look into Hayes Automotive Holdings immediately and call an emergency board meeting. We may have a situation." As she ended the call, Ravenna caught her reflection in the window, ice blonde hair still perfect, royal blue blazer still crisp, makeup still flawless. But for the first time in years, she saw something different in her own eyes. Uncertainty. And downstairs in the showroom, Daniel Hayes watched his daughter's face light up as she learned about automotive engineering from someone who actually cared about teaching her. But his expression remained calculated, focused. This wasn't about cars or school projects or even justice. This was about teaching Ravenna Ashford that cruelty always eventually costs more than kindness ever could, and the real lesson was only beginning. That evening, Ravenna sat in her penthouse apartment 40 stories above Charlotte, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing a city of glittering lights that usually made her feel like a queen surveying her kingdom. Tonight, those same lights felt like watching eyes, witnesses to her spectacular humiliation. Her lawyer, David Preston, sat across from her, his expression grim as he reviewed documents on his tablet. "It's legitimate, Ravenna. Hayes Automotive Holdings is privately owned by Daniel Hayes, 42 years old, net worth estimated between $2 and $3 billion. Started with a single Toyota dealership in Raleigh 20 years ago and built an empire through strategic acquisitions and, ironically, exceptional customer service ratings." $2 billion, Ravenna repeated, her wine glass frozen halfway to her lips. "The man I called a minimum-wage janitor is worth $2 billion. Closer to 3, actually," David corrected. "And that doesn't include his real estate holdings or his wife's trust fund. His wife, Catherine Morrison Hayes, is the daughter of Morrison Industrial, the manufacturing dynasty. They met at UNC, married young, have 3 kids total. The 6-year-old you met is Lily, the youngest. Apparently, she really does have a school project about different types of vehicles, but Hayes used it as an opportunity to test your dealership's culture." Ravenna set down her wine glass with deliberate care. "His wife. He has a wife." A very wealthy, very influential wife who sits on the boards of several charitable organizations focused on economic equality and fair treatment in retail environments. David's tone suggested he understood the implications. This wasn't random, Ravenna. Hayes targeted you specifically, but why? Ravenna stood, pacing to the windows, her heels clicking on imported Italian marble. I run profitable dealerships. My customer satisfaction scores are terrible, David interrupted bluntly. I pulled the data. Your overall rating is 2, 3 out of 5 stars across review platforms. Your flagship location, where today's incident occurred, has a 1.9 rating. Complaints consistently mention staff arrogance, discriminatory treatment, and hostile atmosphere toward middle-class customers. Middle-class customers aren't my target demographic, Ravenna countered. I built this business on luxury, on exclusivity, on alienating 70% of potential buyers who could actually afford your vehicles but feel unwelcome in your showrooms, David finished. Ravenna, Mercedes-Benz isn't just for billionaires. It's for successful professionals, small business owners, dual-income families who've saved for something special. But your approach treats anyone who doesn't arrive in designer clothes like they're wasting your time. Ravenna whirled to face him. So what? So I'm selective about clientele. That's not illegal. No, but it is stupid business practice, and it's making you vulnerable. David set down his tablet. Your board received Hayes's preliminary offer this afternoon. Before you called me, 3 board members had already contacted me asking about the implications. They're interested, Ravenna, very interested. They can't sell without my consent. I'm the majority shareholder. You control 51%, David corrected, but your corporate charter includes provisions allowing a board vote to override CEO decisions in cases of fiduciary duty to shareholders. If they can demonstrate that accepting Hayes's offer serves the company's financial interests better than maintaining current leadership, they can force the sale. Ravenna felt her carefully constructed world tilting. On what grounds? The dealerships are profitable. Profits are declining year over year, David said gently. Customer retention is dropping. Staff turnover is astronomical. You've lost 14 salespeople in the past 6 months alone. And now, a billionaire with a reputation for turning around struggling dealerships has made an offer that values your company at 20% above current market price. The board would be foolish not to seriously consider it. Ravenna sank into her designer sofa, her royal blue blazer suddenly feeling like armor that no longer fit properly. How did I not see this coming? Because you were too busy being cruel to notice you were becoming irrelevant, David said bluntly. They'd known each other since law school. He was one of the few people who could speak to her directly. Ravenna, I've watched you build this empire, and I've watched you lose yourself in the process. You used to care about cars, about creating experiences for customers. Now you care about maintaining an image that's costing you everything. So what do I do? The question came out smaller than Ravenna intended. You have 3 options, David said, ticking them off on his fingers. 1. Fight the acquisition. Drag this into legal battles that will cost millions and destroy your reputation even further. 2. Accept defeat. Sell to Hayes, walk away with a considerable fortune and no business. 3. Find a way to convince Hayes that you're capable of change, that you're worth keeping as CEO if he acquires the company. Option 3 is impossible, Ravenna said bitterly. You didn't see his face today. He wasn't just angry, he was disgusted, like I was something rotten he'd accidentally stepped in. Then maybe, David suggested carefully, you need to show him he was wrong, not with words, but with actions. Before Ravenna could respond, her phone buzzed, a text from Marcus. Ms. Ashford, you need to see this. Attached was a link to a local news website. The headline made Ravenna's blood run cold. Billionaire conducts social experiment at luxury dealership. Results are disturbing. The article, posted just 20 minutes ago, detailed Daniel Hayes's visit to Ashford Luxury Motors, complete with quotes from anonymous staff members, describing Ravenna's treatment of him and his daughter. But worse than the article itself were the comments already flooding in, hundreds of them, each sharing similar stories of being dismissed, insulted, or degraded at Ashford dealerships. "He's destroying me," Ravenna whispered. "He's systematically destroying everything I've built." "No," David corrected, reading over her shoulder. "You destroyed it yourself, with years of terrible behavior. He's just showing the world what you've been doing all along." Ravenna's phone continued buzzing. More texts from Marcus, from other staff members, from her head of PR having a meltdown. Her personal email was flooding with messages from business contacts, from board members, from journalists requesting comment. "I need to respond," Ravenna said, standing abruptly. "I need to issue a statement, do damage control." "What you need to do," David interrupted firmly, "is think very carefully about your next move. Because whatever you do in the next 48 hours will determine whether you're remembered as a cautionary tale or as someone who learned from their mistakes." Ravenna's phone rang. "Richard Chen," she answered on speaker. "Ms. Ashford, I thought you should know that Mr. Hayes left the dealership 2 hours ago, but not before purchasing a Mercedes Maybach S-Class for his wife's birthday. Paid in full, cash wire transfer, $473,000. Ravenna closed her eyes. "He bought a car. After everything that happened, he bought a car from us." "From me, specifically," Richard clarified. "He made it clear the purchase was because of how I treated his daughter, not despite how you treated him. He said, and I'm quoting here, 'This is how you reward good behavior and punish bad behavior in a business context.'" After Richard hung up, Ravenna stood motionless in her luxurious apartment, staring at her reflection in the darkened windows. She barely recognized the woman looking back. Perfect hair, perfect makeup, perfect clothes, all camouflaging something broken inside. Her phone buzzed again, another text, this time from an unknown number. "Miss Ashford, this is Catherine Hayes, Daniel's wife. I believe we should talk tomorrow, 10 a.m., Amelie's Cafe downtown. Come alone and come prepared to listen. This is your one chance to save what you've built. Don't waste it." Ravenna read the message 3 times. This was it, the moment that would define her future. She could ignore it, fight it, maintain her pride and lose everything, or she could face the consequences of her actions and possibly, just possibly, find a path forward. For the first time in her adult life, Ravenna Ashford didn't know what to do, and that uncertainty terrified her more than any business deal ever had. Amelie's Cafe sat tucked into a historic building on Tryon Street, far removed from the gleaming steel towers that defined Charlotte's business district. Ravenna arrived at 9:47 a.m., 13 minutes early, a calculated move to demonstrate respect while maintaining some control. She'd chosen a cream-colored Chanel suit instead of her signature royal blue blazer, hoping the softer color might signal openness to change. Her hands trembled slightly as she ordered coffee she had no intention of drinking. Catherine Morrison Hayes arrived at precisely 10 a.m., and Ravenna immediately understood why Daniel had married her. Catherine possessed the kind of natural elegance that couldn't be purchased. Simple grey cashmere sweater, perfectly fitted jeans, minimal jewelry, except for a wedding ring that probably cost more than most cars. Her dark hair was pulled into a casual ponytail, and her face bore the kind of authentic warmth that made people instantly comfortable. She was everything Ravenna had spent years trying to project, but never quite achieved. "Miss Ashford," Catherine said, extending her hand with genuine friendliness. "Thank you for coming." Ravenna shook her hand, noting the firm grip. "Mrs. Hayes, I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you." "Catherine, please." She settled into the chair across from Ravenna, ordering tea from the waitress with easy kindness. "And may I call you Ravenna? This conversation will be difficult enough without formal barriers." "Of course." Ravenna folded her hands on the table, her perfectly manicured nails, deep red today instead of her usual black, the only visible sign of her anxiety. Catherine studied her for a long moment, not unkindly, but with the assessment of someone accustomed to reading people. I'm going to be direct, because I suspect we both value efficiency. My husband came home yesterday deeply troubled, not angry. Daniel rarely gets angry anymore, but troubled by what he witnessed at your dealership. I made a terrible mistake, Ravenna began, but Catherine held up a hand. Please let me finish. Daniel has conducted these social experiments before, dozens of times over the years. He dresses down, visits businesses we're considering acquiring, and observes how staff treat him. Most places fail the test in small ways: subtle condescension, slightly slower service, assumptions about purchasing power. But your reaction, Ravenna, that was something different entirely. Ravenna felt heat rising in her cheeks, but forced herself to maintain eye contact. You didn't just make assumptions, Catherine continued. You weaponized your power. You deliberately humiliated a child to hurt her father. That's not business strategy. That's cruelty. And here's what concerns me. Everyone in your showroom seemed to expect it. This wasn't an anomaly. This was your standard operating procedure. You're right, Ravenna said quietly. Everything you're saying is accurate, and I have no defense. Catherine's eyebrows rose slightly. That's not what I expected to hear. What did you expect? Justification, excuses, perhaps blame shifting to company culture or market pressures. Instead, you're accepting responsibility. That's interesting. Catherine's tea arrived, and she thanked the waitress by name. Apparently she was a regular here. So let me ask you something, Ravenna. Why are you the way you are? The question landed like a punch. I'm sorry. People aren't born cruel, Catherine said matter-of-factly. Cruelty is learned, usually as a defense mechanism against pain. So what happened to you? Ravenna's first instinct was to deflect, to maintain the armor she'd worn for so long. But something about Catherine's direct yet non-judgmental approach cracked through her defenses. Maybe it was exhaustion from a sleepless night. Maybe it was the recognition that this woman held her future in her hands. Or maybe it was simply the unexpected relief of someone asking about her as a person rather than as a business entity. My father, Ravenna heard herself saying, was Richard Ashford. Perhaps you've heard of him. Catherine's expression shifted to recognition. Ashford Commercial Real Estate. He passed away, what, 5 years ago? 6. And before he died, he spent my entire life telling me I was weak, emotional, incapable of real business success. Ravenna's voice remained steady, but her hands clenched tighter. My mother left when I was 12. My father blamed me, said I was too needy, too demanding, that I'd driven her away. He remarried within a year to a woman who made it clear I was an inconvenience. That must have been devastating, Catherine said softly. It was educational, Ravenna corrected, reverting to the cold business tone that felt safer. I learned that showing emotion meant showing weakness, that being kind meant being exploitable, that the only way to survive was to become harder than everyone else, colder, more ruthless, and it worked. I built Ashford Luxury Motors from a single dealership I inherited into a 15-location empire. I proved my father wrong. Did you? Catherine asked, gently. Or did you just become him? The words hit Ravenna like a physical blow. She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it, because Catherine was right. Everything Ravenna had become, the cruelty, the contempt for anyone she perceived as weak, the obsession with power and control, it was all her father's legacy, transplanted into her personality like a virus. Oh, God, Ravenna whispered, the realization crushing. I've spent 20 years trying to prove I wasn't like him, and I became exactly him. Catherine reached across the table and gently touched Ravenna's clenched hands. The good news is that recognizing it is the first step toward changing it. The question is whether you want to change. Of course I want to change, Ravenna said reflexively, then stopped. No, that's not honest. I want to keep my business. I want to prevent your husband from destroying everything I've built. I don't know if I want to change who I am, because who I am has been remarkably successful. Successful at what? Catherine challenged. Making money, wielding power, being feared. Yes, you've succeeded at those things. But Ravenna, from what I've learned about you, you're 25 years old, worth nearly $1 billion, and you eat dinner alone in your penthouse every single night. You have employees but no friends. You have wealth but no joy. You've won at business and lost at life. Tears threatened, but Ravenna blinked them back furiously. I don't need a therapist. I need to know what your husband wants. What do I have to do to keep my company? Catherine leaned back, her expression shifting from sympathetic to businesslike. Daniel and I discussed this extensively last night. Here are his terms. First, you undergo 6 months of intensive coaching with someone we select, not business coaching. Personal development focusing on empathy, emotional intelligence and leadership through respect rather than fear. Ravenna's jaw clenched, but she nodded. Continue. Second, you implement immediate changes to your dealership's culture. Every employee undergoes customer service training, emphasizing dignity and respect, regardless of customer appearance or perceived wealth. You personally meet with your staff and apologize for creating a toxic environment. Apologize to my staff? Ravenna's pride rebelled. They work for me, which is precisely the attitude that needs to change, Catherine said firmly. They work with you, not for you. And if you can't grasp that distinction, this conversation is over. Ravenna took a deep breath, wrestling with decades of conditioning. What else? Third, you allocate $1 million from your personal fortune to create a foundation providing automotive education and career training to underprivileged youth. Daniel will match your contribution, but you must be personally involved, not just write a check. $1 million and my time, Ravenna calculated. What do I get in return? Daniel withdraws his acquisition offer, provided you meet specific performance metrics over the next year. Customer satisfaction scores must reach 4, 0 out of 5 stars. Employee retention must improve by at least 40%, and you must demonstrate genuine personal growth as assessed by the coach we provide. And if I fail to meet these metrics, then the acquisition proceeds and you're removed as CEO with a standard severance package. Daniel takes over, implements the changes himself, and you become a cautionary tale in business schools about the dangers of toxic leadership. Ravenna processed this, her mind running through implications and consequences. Everything in her wanted to fight, to reject these terms as insulting and demeaning. But underneath that instinctive resistance was something else, a tiny, almost inaudible voice asking, what if they're right? What if there's a better way? Can I ask you something? Ravenna said finally. Why does Daniel care so much? He's worth billions. He could acquire dozens of dealerships. Why go to this trouble for mine specifically? Catherine's expression softened. Because 10 years ago, Daniel was you. Different industry. Same toxic approach. He was destroying himself and everyone around him, convinced that ruthlessness was the only path to success. Then, our oldest son, Christopher, who was 8 at the time, told his teacher that he was afraid of his daddy, that his daddy was always angry and mean. What happened? Daniel had a breakdown. Realized he was repeating patterns from his own traumatic childhood. He spent 2 years in intensive therapy, rebuilt himself from the ground up, and committed to being different. But he also committed to helping other people recognize their own destructive patterns before they lose everything that matters. Your dealership wasn't random, Ravenna. Daniel has been tracking companies run by young executives who exhibit concerning behavioral patterns. He intervenes when he can. So I'm a project, Ravenna said bitterly. A redemption case study. You're a human being who's hurting herself and others, Catherine corrected. And you're being offered a chance very few people get, someone willing to invest time, money and energy into helping you become better. The question is whether your pride will let you accept it. Ravenna stared into her untouched coffee, watching her reflection ripple on its dark surface. Everything she'd built, everything she'd believed about herself and success, was being challenged. She could reject it, fight it, maintain her identity as the ruthless ice queen of Charlotte's luxury automotive market. Or she could take the terrifying step of admitting she'd been wrong about everything. "There's something else you should know," Catherine said, her voice gentler now. "Lily asked about you last night. She wanted to know why you were so sad inside. She said she could tell you were hurting, even when you were being mean. My 6-year-old daughter saw something in you that you've spent years hiding." "What did you tell her?" "That sometimes people forget how to be kind because they've been hurt so badly, and that maybe, with help, they can remember." Catherine pulled a business card from her purse. "This is Dr. Rebecca Chen, the coach Daniel wants you to work with. She's a former Fortune 500 executive who went through similar transformation. Your first session is scheduled for Friday at 2 p.m. if you choose to accept these terms." Ravenna took the card with trembling fingers. Dr. Rebecca Chen, Executive Leadership and Personal Development. The address was in a modest office building, not the prestigious high-rise she'd expect. "I need time to think," Ravenna said. "You have until 5 p.m. today," Catherine replied. "After that, Daniel proceeds with the acquisition, and this opportunity disappears. I'm sorry for the pressure, but he's learned that people committed to change act quickly, while people committed to avoidance delay indefinitely." And as Catherine prepared to leave, Ravenna found herself asking, "Why are you doing this? You don't know me. You have no reason to care whether I succeed or fail." Catherine smiled, the expression transforming her face with genuine warmth. "Because Daniel needed someone to believe in him when he was at his lowest. Because I've seen what transformation looks like, and it's beautiful. And because, Ravenna, underneath all that armor and cruelty, I suspect there's a woman who's exhausted from fighting alone and desperate for permission to be different." After Catherine left, Ravenna sat in the cafe for another hour, Dr. Chen's business card lying on the table like a challenge. Around her, people came and went, young couples sharing pastries, elderly men debating politics, a mother patiently helping her toddler with a muffin, normal people living normal lives, finding joy in simple moments Ravenna had convinced herself were beneath her. Her phone buzzed constantly. Marcus reporting that 3 more negative reviews had appeared online. Her PR director begging for direction on damage control. A text from her father's widow, Ravenna hadn't spoken to her in years, saying she'd seen the news article and wasn't surprised Ravenna had finally shown her true colors. That last message stung more than Ravenna wanted to admit, because it confirmed what she'd always feared, that she was fundamentally unlovable, that people saw through her success to the damaged, angry woman underneath. But then she thought about Lily Hayes, 6 years old, seeing sadness instead of cruelty, recognizing hurt beneath the armor. And Ravenna realized that child had seen her more clearly in 5 minutes than she'd seen herself in 25 years. At 4:47 p.m., Ravenna sent a text to the number Catherine had provided. "I accept the terms. I'll be at Dr. Chen's office Friday at 2 p.m. The response came immediately. "This is Daniel Hayes. I'm glad you're choosing to try. This will be the hardest thing you've ever done, but it will also be the most important. See you Friday. I'll be joining your first session." Ravenna's stomach dropped. Of course he'd be there. Of course she'd have to face him again, confront the full weight of her failure. But maybe that was the point. Maybe transformation required witnesses, people who held you accountable when instinct screamed to retreat into familiar destructive patterns. That evening, instead of returning to her penthouse, Ravenna drove to her flagship dealership. She arrived after closing, using her key to enter the empty showroom. The Mercedes vehicles sat silent under dimmed lights, beautiful machines representing achievement and aspiration. But walking through the space where she'd humiliated Daniel and Lily Hayes, Ravenna saw it differently now. Not as a temple to success, but as a stage where she'd performed cruelty for an audience of employees too intimidated to challenge her. She climbed to her office, sat at her desk, and opened her laptop. For the next 3 hours, she read every negative review of her dealerships, forcing herself to absorb the pain she'd caused. Teachers who'd saved for years to buy their dream car, only to be treated like their business didn't matter. Young families excited about a new vehicle, dismissed because they asked questions about financing. Elderly couples patronized and rushed through purchases because they didn't fit Ravenna's image of ideal customers. By midnight, Ravenna had read 347 complaints, 347 people she'd trained her staff to dehumanize, 347 opportunities to choose kindness that she'd deliberately rejected in favor of maintaining an atmosphere of exclusive cruelty. She pulled out a legal pad and began writing. Not a business plan or damage control strategy, but a letter to her employees, to her customers, to herself, an acknowledgement of harm done, and a commitment to change. The words came slowly, painfully, like pulling shrapnel from a wound. At 1:37 a.m., she finished and read it over. It was raw, honest, and terrifying to contemplate sharing. Everything in her resisted this vulnerability, this public admission of failure, but Catherine's words echoed in her mind. You've won at business and lost at life. Ravenna saved the letter and shut down her laptop. As she prepared to leave, she paused by the window overlooking the showroom floor. Tomorrow would be the first day of either transformation or destruction. She couldn't predict which path she'd ultimately follow, but for the first time in years, she felt something unexpected, a tiny spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, there was a version of herself worth discovering beneath the armor. Friday arrived with unseasonable warmth, the November sun casting long golden rays through Dr. Rebecca Chen's office windows. Ravenna sat in the waiting area, her royal blue Armani blazer feeling like obsolete armor. She'd deliberately chosen it, one last assertion of her old identity before whatever came next. Daniel Hayes arrived 5 minutes after her, dressed casually in jeans and a simple button-down shirt. Without the janitor's uniform, he looked younger than his 42 years, though his eyes carried the weight of someone who'd seen darkness and chosen light. He nodded at Ravenna, his expression neutral, and took a seat across from her. "Thank you for coming," Ravenna said, her voice stiff with discomfort. "This isn't for you," Daniel replied quietly. "This is for every person you'll encounter in the future who deserves better than what you've been giving them." Before Ravenna could respond, the inner office door opened. Dr. Rebecca Chen appeared, and Ravenna immediately understood why Catherine had chosen her. Dr. Chen was probably in her 50s, with short silver hair and the kind of presence that radiated calm authority. She wore simple black slacks and a coral sweater, professional but approachable. "Ravenna, Daniel, please come in." Her voice was warm but firm, the tone of someone who wouldn't tolerate pretense or games. The office interior surprised Ravenna. Instead of the leather furniture and mahogany desk she expected, the space felt more like a living room. Comfortable chairs arranged in a circle, plants bringing life to corners, art on the walls that depicted transformation, butterflies, phoenixes, seeds breaking through soil. "Let's start with ground rules," Dr. Chen said once they were seated. "First, everything shared in this room stays in this room unless you choose to share it elsewhere. Second, honesty is mandatory. I can't help you if you're performing rather than revealing. Third, discomfort is the price of growth. If you're not uncomfortable at some point today, we're not going deep enough." She looked directly at Ravenna. "Daniel has shared his perspective on what happened at your dealership. I've reviewed the news coverage and the online complaints, but I want to hear from you. Tell me about Tuesday afternoon, but not the facts. I know the facts. Tell me what you were feeling." Ravenna's throat tightened. She'd prepared defenses, explanations, strategic admissions of error. But feelings? That territory was foreign and frightening. "I was in control," she began. "I saw someone who didn't belong in my space, who represented everything I'd built my business to exclude. I felt satisfied asserting my authority." "Keep going," Dr. Chen prompted. "Beneath the control and satisfaction, what else?" Ravenna closed her eyes, forcing herself to examine the memory honestly. "Fear," she admitted. "Fear that if I allowed exceptions, if I showed softness, my entire business model would crumble. Fear that treating everyone with dignity would somehow diminish the exclusivity I'd worked so hard to create. And when you looked at Lily, Dr. Chen's voice was gentle but insistent, a 6-year-old child asking polite questions about cars, what did you feel? This was harder. Ravenna's hands clenched in her lap. I felt angry, irrationally angry, because she was innocent and hopeful, and those things felt like weaknesses I'd spent years eliminating from myself. Across from her, Daniel remained silent, but Ravenna could feel his attention like a weight. You wanted to kill those qualities in her, Dr. Chen said, not accusingly but a simple observation. Because if they could exist in a child, it meant you'd sacrifice them unnecessarily in yourself. Ravenna's eyes snapped open. That's not... She stopped, because it was true. Every innocent question Lily asked, every moment of unguarded joy, reminded Ravenna of everything she'd cut out of herself in pursuit of invulnerability. My father used to say that childhood wonder was for people who couldn't handle adult reality, Ravenna whispered. He said being emotional was weakness, that successful people transcended feelings. So I learned to transcend them. I learned to see kindness as naivety, compassion as exploitation waiting to happen, joy as dangerous vulnerability. And it worked, Dr. Chen acknowledged. You built tremendous success. But Ravenna, here's what I want you to consider. What if your father was wrong? What if the cost of that success was your humanity? I don't know if I have any humanity left to recover, Ravenna said, the admission devastating. I did. Daniel spoke for the first time since entering the office. Both women turned to him. 10 years ago, I was you. Different business, same toxicity. I'd convinced myself that cruelty was strategy, that fear was respect, that isolation was strength. And then my 8-year-old son told his teacher he was afraid of me. He leaned forward, his eyes holding Ravenna's. I came home that day, and Catherine confronted me with what I'd become. I denied it, defended myself, blamed stress and market pressures, but she made me watch videos of myself, interactions with employees, with my kids, with service workers, and I didn't recognize the man on screen. He was angry, dismissive, cold. He was my father, the man who'd terrorized my childhood, and I'd sworn I'd never become him. What did you do? Ravenna asked, her voice barely audible. I broke, Daniel said simply, completely fell apart, checked myself into therapy, worked with Dr. Chen for 2 years, rebuilt my entire understanding of success and leadership. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, and I resisted every step. But Ravenna, the man I became on the other side, he's someone my children run to instead of away from, someone my employees respect because he respects them, someone who can sleep at night. Dr. Chen let the silence hold, then spoke. Ravenna, I'm going to give you an assignment for our next session. I want you to interview 3 people whose lives you've negatively impacted, not customers. They're too distant. I want you to talk to 3 employees. Ask them to honestly describe what it's like working for you, and I want you to just listen. Don't defend, don't explain, don't justify, just absorb their truth. Ravenna struggled to find words. That's humiliating. Yes, Dr. Chen agreed. Necessary humiliation. The kind that breaks through denial and forces real change. Daniel did this exercise. Would you like to share what you learned? Daniel's expression grew somber. I learned that my executive assistant had anxiety attacks before our morning meetings, that my operations manager drank heavily to cope with the stress of working for me, that my head of sales had been planning to quit for 6 months but couldn't afford to lose his health insurance while his wife was in cancer treatment. I destroyed these people's well-being and convinced myself I was just being an effective leader. And after you learned this, Dr. Chen prompted, I apologized. Individually, sincerely, I changed my management approach. I became someone who asked questions instead of issuing commands, who admitted mistakes instead of blaming others, who recognized that leadership is service, not dominance. He looked at Ravenna. Some people forgave me. Some didn't. Some left anyway. the damage too deep to repair. But I became someone I could respect, and that was worth everything I lost in the process. Ravenna felt tears threatening, a sensation so foreign it alarmed her. I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I can face how much I've hurt people. That's the work, Dr. Chen said firmly. Facing it, owning it, using that knowledge as motivation for transformation. Ravenna, you have a choice right now. You can retreat into your old patterns, maintain your armor, and lose your business while keeping your pride. Or you can do the brave thing. Admit you've been wrong, endure the discomfort of change, and build something better. The session continued for another hour, with Dr. Chen guiding Ravenna through exercises examining her beliefs about power, success, and human worth. By the end, Ravenna felt emotionally excavated, exhausted in ways that had nothing to do with physical tiredness. As they prepared to leave, Daniel paused at the door. "Ravenna, one more thing. Lily wanted me to give you this." He handed her a piece of paper, a child's drawing showing two figures, one tall and one small, holding hands. Above them, Lily had written in careful letters, "Everyone deserves kindness, even mean people." Ravenna stared at the drawing, and something inside her finally irrevocably broke. The tears she'd been fighting cascaded down her cheeks, ruining her carefully applied makeup, dissolving the last remnants of her protective facade. "She doesn't hate me," Ravenna whispered. "After everything, she doesn't hate me." "Children rarely hate," Daniel said gently. "They haven't learned how yet. They still believe people can change, can become better. Maybe we should believe that too." After Daniel left, Ravenna remained in Dr. Chen's office, crying with the kind of deep, wrenching sobs she hadn't allowed herself since childhood. Dr. Chen sat beside her, not speaking, just present, bearing witness to the collapse of old armor and the terrifying vulnerability of new beginning. When the tears finally subsided, Ravenna looked at her reflection in the office window. Her mascara was ruined, her eyes red, her perfect image destroyed. And for the first time in 20 years, she recognized the woman staring back, not the Ice Queen, not her father's daughter, but someone real, damaged, and possibly salvageable. "What if I can't change enough?" Ravenna asked Dr. Chen. "What if I do all this work and I'm still fundamentally broken?" "Then you'll be a broken person trying to do better, which is infinitely more valuable than a perfect person causing harm," Dr. Chen replied. "Transformation isn't about becoming flawless, Ravenna. It's about becoming honest. Honest about your damage, honest about your impact, honest about your intention to do better." That evening, Ravenna returned to her dealership with a new purpose. She called an emergency all-staff meeting for Monday morning. Then she sat in her office and began writing individual emails to 3 employees: Marcus Sterling, her head of sales, Jennifer Park, the receptionist who'd been with the company for 5 years, and Thomas Rodriguez, a junior salesman who'd recently transferred from their southern location. Each email said the same thing: "I need to understand what working for me has been like. I'm asking for your honest truth, even if, especially if, it's difficult to hear. Please meet me this week. No consequences, no retaliation. Just truth." By Sunday evening, all 3 had responded. They'd agreed to meet. And Ravenna Ashford, for the first time in her adult life, prepared to truly listen to how her actions had impacted people she'd never bothered to see as fully human. The old Ravenna would have viewed this as weakness. The new Ravenna, still fragile, still uncertain, still fighting decades of conditioning, recognized it as the bravest thing she'd ever done. Monday morning arrived with cold rain, the kind that soaked through clothes and chilled bones. Ravenna stood before the assembled staff of her flagship dealership, 37 people ranging from salespeople to mechanics to administrative staff, and felt more terrified than she'd ever been in any business negotiation. She'd abandoned her royal blue blazer for a simple grey sweater and black slacks. Her hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she wore minimal makeup. The armor was gone, leaving only the woman underneath, flawed, frightened, and determined. Thank you all for coming on short notice, Ravenna began, her voice less steady than she'd like, but honest. I've called this meeting because I owe you all an apology and an explanation. She could see surprise rippling through the crowd. Ravenna Ashford didn't apologize. Ravenna Ashford issued directives and expected compliance. Last Tuesday, something happened that forced me to examine who I've become and what kind of leader I've been. Many of you witnessed it, my treatment of a customer and his daughter. What you didn't know is that customer was Daniel Hayes, a billionaire conducting what he calls a social experiment. He wanted to see how we treat people we perceive as having less money or status than our typical clientele. Ravenna paused, seeing some heads nodding in recognition. The story had spread throughout the company. We failed. I failed. Spectacularly. She took a breath, pushing past the urge to soften this admission. But here's what I've realized over the past few days. That wasn't an isolated incident. That was a pattern. A pattern I established and you all were forced to work within. I created a culture where cruelty to customers was normalized, where treating people with dignity was seen as weakness, where fear was confused with respect. Jennifer Park, the receptionist, shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Marcus Sterling's expression was carefully neutral, revealing nothing. I've spent the past week reviewing every complaint filed against our dealerships, Ravenna continued. 347 negative reviews detailing how our staff, following my example and my implicit instructions, made customers feel small, unwelcome, and disrespected. 347 people who deserved better. She looked directly at her audience now, letting them see her without the protective facade. I was raised by someone who taught me that kindness was weakness, that emotions were liabilities, that success required being harder and colder than everyone else, and I believed him. I built this company on those principles, but I was wrong about everything. Thomas Rodriguez, the junior salesman, raised his hand tentatively. Ms. Ashford, what does this mean for us, for our jobs? It means everything is changing, Ravenna said firmly. Starting immediately, we're implementing new training focused on treating every customer with dignity, regardless of their appearance, their questions, or our assumptions about their purchasing power. It means I'm meeting individually with each of you to understand how my leadership style has impacted your well-being. And it means I'm committed to becoming a different kind of leader, one who earns respect through character, rather than demanding it through fear. She could see skepticism in many faces. Words were easy. Consistent action was what mattered. Some of you will choose to leave, and I'll understand. Some of you may never trust that this change is real, and that's fair given my track record. But for those willing to give me a chance to prove I can be better, I promise you this. I will work harder at becoming a decent human being than I ever worked at being a successful businesswoman. After the meeting, Ravenna began the interviews Dr. Chen had assigned. Marcus Sterling came first, settling into the chair across from Ravenna's desk with the wary caution of someone expecting a trap. Tell me honestly what it's been like working for me, Ravenna said, her notepad ready but her focus entirely on Marcus. Marcus was silent for a long moment. Then, every morning I have to give myself a pep talk before coming in. I tell myself that today will be different, that maybe you'll acknowledge good work instead of only pointing out failures. I've worked here for 7 years, Ms. Ashford. 7 years. And I can count on one hand the number of times you've said something positive to me. The words landed like blows. Ravenna forced herself not to defend, not to explain, just listen. I watched you destroy Sarah Chen's confidence so thoroughly that she quit after 3 years of exceptional performance. Marcus continued, his voice gaining strength. She made one minor mistake on a contract, and you berated her in front of the entire sales team for 15 minutes. She went to the bathroom and cried, then submitted her resignation that afternoon. She was pregnant, Ms. Ashford. She needed this job. But you made her feel so worthless that she'd rather lose her income than face you again. I didn't know she was pregnant, Ravenna said softly. You didn't ask. You never ask about our lives, our challenges, our circumstances. We're just tools to you, useful when we perform, disposable when we don't. Jennifer Park's interview was equally devastating. I have nightmares about being called to your office, she admitted. I wake up in a panic thinking I've done something wrong. My therapist says I have symptoms of PTSD from working here, from working for you. Thomas Rodriguez revealed that he'd transferred from the southern location specifically to escape a manager who'd learned leadership from Ravenna's example. I thought working directly under you might be different, that maybe the problem was just one bad manager, but it's systemic. It comes from the top, from you. By the end of the week, Ravenna had interviewed 17 employees. 17 people sharing stories of anxiety, of diminished self-worth, of toxic work environments that bled into their personal lives and relationships. And through it all, Ravenna listened, absorbed, and documented, not to defend herself, but to truly understand the scope of harm she'd caused. Friday afternoon, she met with Daniel Hayes again, this time at his company headquarters. He offered her coffee, which she accepted, and gestured to a comfortable chair in his surprisingly modest office. I did the interviews, Ravenna said without preamble. All 17 of them. It was worse than I imagined. Tell me, Daniel said simply. I've destroyed people, not just inconvenienced them or made their jobs difficult. I've genuinely damaged their mental health, their self-confidence, their well-being. And the worst part? I never once considered their humanity. They were just functions to me. Sales function, receptionist function, mechanic function. Not people with lives and feelings and vulnerabilities. Daniel nodded slowly. And now that you see them as people, now I'm horrified by who I've been. But Daniel, I don't know if recognition is enough. I don't know if I can undo this damage or become someone different enough to deserve leading these people. You can't undo it, Daniel said bluntly. Some damage is permanent. Sarah Chen, the woman Marcus mentioned. You'll never get the chance to apologize to her or repair that relationship. Some people you've hurt are gone, and that's a consequence you have to live with. The words hurt, but Ravenna accepted them. So, what do? You become someone who never causes that kind of harm again. You apologize to those who are still here and mean it. You implement real systemic changes and follow through consistently, even when it's inconvenient. And you accept that some people will never forgive you, and that's their right. Daniel leaned forward. Ravenna, transformation isn't about receiving absolution. It's about becoming accountable. It's about saying, I was wrong, I caused harm, and I'm committed to being different without expecting applause or forgiveness. It's about doing the work because it's right, not because it benefits you. The board meeting is next week, Ravenna said. They'll vote on whether to accept your acquisition offer or give me a chance to prove I can change. What should I tell them? Tell them the truth. That you've been a terrible leader who created toxic environments and hurt people. That you're committed to change but understand if they don't trust you. That you'll accept whatever decision they make because you recognize you've earned their doubt. That's not exactly a compelling pitch for keeping my job, Ravenna said wryly. No, but it's honest. And Ravenna, honesty is the only currency that matters now. Your ability to spin, manipulate, or intimidate is what got you into this situation. Only radical honesty will get you out. The board meeting took place the following Wednesday in the conference room of Ashford Luxury Motors' main office. 9 board members sat around the polished table, their expressions ranging from curious to hostile. David Preston, Ravenna's lawyer, sat beside her, his presence supportive but silent. Ravenna stood at the head of the table. No presentation slides, no strategic talking points. Just her and the truth. I've prepared a comprehensive report on the past 2 weeks, she began, distributing folders containing customer satisfaction plans, employee well-being initiatives, and culture transformation strategies. But before you review those documents, I need to say something. She looked at each board member in turn. I've been a terrible CEO. Not financially. The numbers show profitability. But in every measure that actually matters, I've failed. I've created environments where employees are afraid and customers feel disrespected. I've prioritized exclusivity over humanity. And I've done it all while congratulating myself on my business acumen. Board member Patricia Vance, a 67-year-old former automotive executive, raised an eyebrow. Ms. Ashford, are you arguing against yourself? I'm being honest. You're considering Daniel Hayes' acquisition offer, and you should. He's offering fair value, and he has a proven track record of turning around companies with the exact problems I've created. If you choose to sell, I'll accept that decision without legal challenge because I understand I've earned your doubt. However, Ravenna continued, I'm also asking for 1 year. 1 year to prove I can transform this company's culture while maintaining profitability. The documents before you outline specific, measurable goals. Customer satisfaction scores reaching 4. And 0 out of 5 stars, employee retention improving by at least 40%, and implementation of comprehensive training programs emphasizing dignity and respect. James Morrison, Patricia's colleague, spoke up. What makes you think you can change, Ms. Ashford? People don't fundamentally alter who they are. You're right that fundamental change is rare, Ravenna acknowledged. But I've spent the past 2 weeks in intensive coaching with Dr. Rebecca Chen, interviewing employees about the harm I've caused, and confronting everything I've been avoiding about myself. I can't promise I'm completely transformed. That would be dishonest. But I can promise I'm committed to the work of becoming better. She pulled out Lily Hayes' drawing, now framed and sitting on her desk as daily reminder. A 6-year-old child, someone I treated with contempt, gave me this. She wrote, "Everyone deserves kindness, even mean people." That child saw something in me I'd forgotten existed, the possibility of redemption. I'm asking you to see it too. The board deliberated for 3 hours while Ravenna waited in her office, anxiety warring with acceptance. Whatever they decided, she'd survive. She'd lost businesses before, or rather, she'd built this one from near nothing. She could do it again if necessary, but more than keeping her company, she wanted the chance to prove she could lead differently. Patricia Vance finally entered Ravenna's office, her expression unreadable. The board has reached a decision. Ravenna stood, her heart pounding. I'm ready to hear it, to hear. We're giving you 1 year with quarterly reviews and very specific performance metrics. But Ravenna, understand this. We're not doing this because we fully trust you. We're doing it because Daniel Hayes specifically recommended we give you this chance. He said you reminded him of himself 10 years ago, and he believes genuine transformation is possible if you commit to the work. Relief and gratitude crashed over Ravenna. Thank you. I won't waste this opportunity. See that you don't. And Ravenna, the first test is tomorrow. We've scheduled a town hall meeting where every employee from all 15 locations can submit anonymous questions. You'll answer publicly, honestly, and without defensiveness. Consider it your first demonstration of the new leadership style you're claiming to embrace. The town hall was exactly as brutal as promised. 173 employees, 3 dozen brutal questions, and 2 hours of Ravenna standing exposed before people she'd spent years intimidating. Why should we believe this change is real and not just damage control? Asked a mechanic from the western location. You shouldn't, Ravenna answered honestly. Not yet. Belief is earned through consistent action over time. All I can do is show up every day and prove through behavior that I'm different. Judge me by my actions, not my words. Do you regret the way you've treated us? Asked an administrative assistant from the southern location. Profoundly, and I know saying it doesn't undo the harm. Some of you may never forgive me, and that's completely valid. But yes, I regret it with everything I am. What happened to Sarah Chen? The question came from Marcus, his voice carrying clearly through the room. The woman you destroyed so completely she quit while pregnant. Have you tried to make that right? Ravenna's throat tightened. I've attempted to contact Sarah Chen multiple times over the past week. She hasn't responded, and she has every right not to. I've sent a detailed apology and established a fund to support her during her maternity leave, but I can't force her to accept either. That's a consequence I have to live with, that some damage can't be repaired. The questions continued, each one stripping away another layer of pretense. By the end, Ravenna felt emotionally flayed, but strangely lighter. The truth, no matter how painful, was ultimately less exhausting than maintaining facades. 6 months later, Ravenna stood in her flagship dealership showroom, now redesigned to feel more welcoming and less intimidating, and watched a family of 4 enter. The father wore mechanic's coveralls, the mother a nurse's scrubs, and their 2 children bounced with excitement. Michelle Torres, one of the new sales associates hired specifically for her empathy and customer service skills, approached them with genuine warmth. "Welcome to Ashford Motors. I'm Michelle. Are you folks looking for something specific today?" Ravenna watched from her office as Michelle spent the next hour patiently answering questions, letting the children sit in vehicles, and treating this working-class family with the same respect she'd give any customer. No assumptions, no condescension, just human dignity offered freely. The family left with information packets and genuine smiles, promising to return when they'd saved enough for a down payment. They might not buy for another year, but they'd been treated well, and they'd remember it. Ms. Ashford, Jennifer Park, the receptionist who now smiled when Ravenna approached, appeared in her doorway. "You have visitors." Daniel Hayes entered with Lily, now 7 years old and carrying a school report. "We were in the neighborhood," Daniel explained, "and Lily wanted to show you something." Lily approached shyly, but without fear. "I got an A on my project about different types of cars, and I told my class about how people can change if they try really hard. My teacher said it was really mature of me." Ravenna knelt to Lily's level, her eyes stinging. "Can I read it?" Lily handed her the report, and Ravenna read about automotive engineering, safety features, and environmental impacts. But the conclusion focused on something else entirely. "The most important thing I learned is that everyone deserves kindness, even if they make mistakes, because people can change if someone believes in them." "This is beautiful, Lily," Ravenna said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for believing I could change." "You still doing the hard work?" Lily asked seriously. "Daddy says changing is hard work every day." "Your daddy is very wise. And yes, I'm still doing the work, every single day." After they left, Ravenna returned to her office where Dr. Chen's business card remained pinned to her bulletin board alongside Lily's original drawing. Her customer satisfaction scores had reached 3, 8 out of 5 stars. Not perfect, but dramatically improved. Employee retention had increased by 52%, and perhaps most importantly, Ravenna had learned to measure success by different metrics. How many employees smiled when she entered a room instead of tensing? How many customers left feeling valued regardless of whether they purchased? How many nights could she sleep knowing she'd done no harm that day? The change wasn't complete. Ravenna still struggled with impatience, still fought ingrained instincts toward judgment and control. But she'd learned something her father never taught her, that strength wasn't about being harder than everyone else. It was about being brave enough to be kind, even when kindness felt dangerous. That evening, as Ravenna prepared to close her office, Marcus appeared in her doorway. "Ms. Ashford, I wanted you to know Sarah Chen responded to your outreach. She's willing to meet with you next week." Ravenna's hand trembled as she set down her pen. "She is?" She said your persistence and the fact that you've maintained consistent change for 6 months convinced her you might be genuine. No promises about forgiveness, but she'll listen. After Marcus left, Ravenna sat alone in her office and allowed herself a moment of quiet gratitude. Not gratitude for keeping her business or avoiding consequences, but gratitude for the chance to face someone she'd hurt and offer a genuine apology with no expectation of absolution. She looked out at the showroom floor where her staff was closing up for the day, chatting and laughing together in ways that would have been unthinkable a year ago. And Ravenna realized that somewhere in the process of trying to save her business, she'd found something more valuable. She'd found her humanity again. The journey wasn't over. Transformation was ongoing, daily, sometimes moment-by-moment work. But for the first time in her adult life, Ravenna Ashford was becoming someone she could respect, someone her younger self might have admired, someone who understood that true wealth wasn't measured in dollars or dealerships, but in the lives you touched with dignity and the hearts you treated with care. And that lesson, taught by a man in a janitor's uniform and reinforced by a 6-year-old child's wisdom, was worth more than all the Mercedes-Benz vehicles in her inventory combined.